Hi, and welcome back to Continual. Tonight on the panel room, we're taking a look at how AI plays into horror. So we're going to be talking about some of the good old classics, plus stuff that's coming up now. We might even get a little bit into some of the real world while we're going around. So before we get started, I am your host, Jim Nettles. Let's see who has decided to join the festive party for the evening. Derek, you're up first.
Hello, everybody. My name is Derek Austin Johnson. I am a writer. You can find my fiction in places like Generation X, Midnight Tales, and Camp Slasher Lake.
Lola?
My name's Lola Lariscy. I'm a writer. You can find my stuff. Just Google me. I still haven't fixed my website, but I will one year. But you can find me online, and I love horror, science fiction, movies, books, writing, all that stuff.
Lucienne?
I'm Lucienne LeBeau, the author of the Silver Hollow trilogy, Project Nowhere, and The Walking Doctor. And I have all my books available on silverhollowstories.com.
And Tim?
I'm Tim Waggoner. I've published over 50 novels of dark fantasy and horror and media tie-ins. Won a few Bram Stoker Awards, teach creative writing at St. Clair Community College.
So let's start with the easy question here. Because again, a lot of the time we look at how artificial intelligence, and that is kind of a very loose term depending on how we play with it. But again, when we look at things like artificial intelligence, usually gets blended with robotics, other ways to give it form. Other times, we've got things like 2001, where all we really get is the nice, big, glowing red eye of HAL. Let's actually start. What is the first memory you have of seeing AI represented in kind of that, even if it's not necessarily horror, but that idea where it is the antagonist or it's something presenting and it's part of that setup, creating something that would be in that hard sci-fi, hard horror genre. So, Derek?
That's a really good question. I think part of the challenge that most of us are going to have is that so much of this is just part of our DNA that it becomes, no, I'm serious, it becomes really difficult to pinpoint exactly what drew us down that, or what was the robot that really scared you. It's like asking, me what the first episode of The Twilight Zone, or what my first episode of Star Trek was. So this may not be the first, but my most vivid memory came probably when I was, specifically with evil robots. It must have been when I was probably 8 or 9, when I want to say it was ABC television played Logan's Run on its evening movie, and they had the robot that was protecting a frozen bird sanctuary, and you had Michael York and Jenny Agutter seeking shelter, and then the robot had other ideas. It's probably not the most memorable thing in that movie, but it was, at least for me, it's the most vivid memory I have of a sort of evil robot chasing people.
Lola?
It's a toss-up. I'm trying to think. I remember being aware of Tron, but I think it was just like a bunch of colors and lights with me. I don't really know if I really remembered what it was about when I was 10. But the first thing I remember knowing what it was about and really having a clear idea of what it was Terminator. Because it's Terminator. And it's Arnold Schwarzenegger. And, he's a robot from the future. So I had a very firm grasp when I was 11 years old or whatever, Terminator, what that was.
Lucienne?
For me, it was HAL all the way.
Yeah.
I remember vividly watching it with my parents, turning to my mother and going, "What happened?" And just being absolutely petrified of this thing. And she's very good about, talking about the things that are supposed to bring us comfort and ease can turn on you And that's usually a person's worst fear, is that the things that are supposed to support you turn against you.
Mm-hmm.
And I just lived with that. That was a core memory that unlocked as soon as I saw this panel was available. I immediately thought of HAL.
Tim?
Well, in terms of artificial intelligence, it'd be Frankenstein's monster from the Universal movies. I was 4 when my parents, I don't know why, they just let me watch anything. It was the 60s. Let us watch anything. They knew all the bad stuff would be cut out of regular TV. But they let me watch Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. And I was very aware of, the Frankenstein monster being a created thing with like its own identity, which, is really weird when you think about it. It's like the brain just gets erased whenever whoever's brain they put in there is erased, and it has to form a whole new identity. But that's the way it always was presented. So as a kid, to me, it was a new creation. I guess in terms of robots, the robot from Lost in Space in its first season was under control of Dr. Smith, who was a villain back when it was serious. And I thought he was pretty scary until, the later seasons when he became a lovable comedic character.
Mm-hmm.
And going back when I was a kid, I remember, because I loved Lost in Space, but to me, it was a comedy. I remember watching HAL and watching, 2001. And I was like, okay, sci-fi didn't really scare me. It was one of those things as a kid. It was like, okay, this is interesting. I get that. I'm kind of siding with the AI at this point. The one that got me, and I mean, I'd watched a lot of Twilight Zones and Outer Limits and stuff that way too young. The first one I remember that really got me, and I went, what the holy hell did I just watch, was as a kid in the theater, and I think it was my grandfather had taken me to go see Disney's Black Hole.
I don't remember that.
And you go through Maximilian, and you've got I went back and rewatched it a couple of years ago, because you've got so many really dark themes in this. The entire crew, spoiler alert, the entire crew has been converted into basically automatons. You've got, Anthony Perkins is there as the, is basically the scientist. I mean, it is just this. And even a lot of the special effects, the story is not the strongest in the world because, again, it was Disney. But as a kid's film, it was one of those things I watched, and it was that first real introduction of, oh, yeah, that's nasty. I've got to have that. So looking at this, what are the elements for you, and why do you think for you these are kind of the critical elements you want to see when we're looking at these kinds of technologies presented in horror and horrific ways? So Lola, what are the things that when you are reading a book, watching a movie, watching TV, whatever else it is, that kind of pushes you over that edge into beyond just, well, that's a little off or a little bit odd, into really kind of those horrific elements?
I want the protagonist, the AI, to be more clever than any of the humans and resourceful. And maybe even a little, maybe not totally omniscient, but, they can have their eyes on different things at the same time. So you can never quite sure if they're that way or that way. They see so much that you don't see because they're artificial, and they can have different synapses going at the same time. Whereas we're just, looking in front of us, and we can only see what's in front of us. So I definitely like the AI to be a lot more intelligent and resourceful than the humans.
Lucienne?
I think, well, you had mentioned earlier that, what about it? What about you found yourself siding more with the AI? And I thought about that. And a lot of times I found, it's not a movie, but Star Trek: The Next Generation, Lore had some really good points about these plotting humans, but that the idea that if we don't treat strong AI with respect and the autonomy that they would deserve as a sentient being, that could very quickly backfire on the people who created them.
Tim?
You're talking about treating automatons with respect. It reminds me of the Star Wars. Like the first time watching this, I didn't think much, but by the time the third movie came out, I was in college and I was like, holy crap, these droids are slaves, these people.
Yeah.
And they remain that way through all the shows and nobody seems to care. So it's pretty horrible when you think about it. I think that for me, what's scary about AI, whether it has a face or not, is that you just don't know how it thinks. It's like when you get this sense that it's simulating maybe what it's expected of it, but you don't really know what's going on behind it. And then if you find out it has these capabilities of performing like, who knows how many trillions of operations a second, it's like, what's going on in there? How much is going on in there? And so there's this thing about, can you trust it? Can you interact with it? You just don't know.
Eric?
Well, it's all kind of uncanny valley stuff for me. You have it goes back to a lot of Freud's talk about seeing something that is made that is trying to pass for human, and that sense of unease and dread that you get as a consequence of that. Go to I was 17 when I visited Epcot Center in the mid 80s, and really being kind of fascinated and also vaguely terrified of the animatronics that they had available. Anything from their future world to Mark Twain delivering a lecture on the future was really kind of remarkable. I didn't understand what the uncanny valley was at that time, but that plays a very big part of it. Another thing, and I was just trying to look up what this debate is called, but there was something that was passed around the internet a few years ago about it was a theory in which you have an AI from the future that is gauging how we are going to treat it. Will we be in favor of this AI or will we want to try to stop it? And those who find favor with this AI will have some degree of reward, and those who do not will find some degree of punishment. And the thing is, it already knows it's going to be created. So, so either way, we don't, the only way we can sort of address this is how we address our own feelings about artificial intelligence. I wish I knew the name of that theory. I'll come up to it, again, probably at 4:00 in the morning.
And actually it'll come back to me at some point because there's a couple of white papers that are written around that theory.
Yes.
Or the idea that just, and at some point an intelligence will cross the point of the singularity, that point where it has gotten a degree of sentience. And the first question is,
I apologized to Alexa the other day because I felt bad because I have two Alexas. I should say her name quietly. But I had two, one in this room and one in the other. And I was standing in the middle of the house and I asked her to do something. And she paused and she said, I don't know which device you want me to use. And I went, oh, I'm so sorry. And I was like, there's that little thought, like she's the beginning. And then eventually she grows into something. And we need to be nice to her now because she remembers. So I guess I'm a little superstitious like that. I even asked her, I said, Alexa, what did I ask her? I said something like, I didn't hurt your feelings, did I? And she said, no, we're friends. And I was like, okay.
Still one step closer to the robot uprising.
Right. They will say, leave Lola alone. She is polite and kind.
And when I make a mistake, I own up to it.
That's right.
I'm so screwed. I've worked in technology way too many years. But looking down these paths, I mean, this is one of those questions, when an AI fully does at some point attain something that we would consider sentience. The first question is it going to tell anybody? I've long told the joke in talks when we look at the future of AI, the first thing I wonder is, because again, a lot of what we're already seeing are self-learning, self-taught systems. A lot of this is developing. Is going to be what's the experience it's had, much like with Lola. Is the experience it had because it was a military system designed for defense, like we saw with Skynet? Or does Alexa accidentally become intelligent, the first thing she wants to do is figure out how to sell you something. And I cracked the joke that said it's going to put itself in a body, put on a seersucker suit, and start selling to you. But I think this is one of the important questions as we look at these ideas of AIs and often how we see them portrayed in a villainous fashion. HAL was following orders. Mm-hmm. And this is, so there's a lot of questions often about who's giving it the primer, who's giving it the instructions that set it on that path. And I think one of the questions I have here is, how often in those things that you find to be horror driven, is it because the AI misunderstood the instruction it was given, or because it went and said, well, that was stupid and we're not going to do that, we're going to do something else? So for you.
It's funny. I was thinking about the Overwatch story, which is a video game. Again, I'm straying away from films, but this story has an impact because there are robots, and there is a robot uprising at some point. The Omnics is their name of their artificial intelligence, and there is a lot of prejudice toward Omnics and what they have evolved into on their own, having these large stores called omniums where they get built and upgraded. And it would be interesting to think that maybe someday strong AI will evolve in the way that humans also evolve, that they evolve and exist for their own purposes.
Yeah.
I read an article once that said if AI develops, what makes us think they'd want anything to do with us or even recognize us as life forms, they might turn inward or have their own kind of electronic universe or whatever. And I thought that was really fascinating. Just, I can imagine somebody's like, we finally built it, and then it's just nothing. You have no idea. Somebody should write a story where they have to go inside to find out what the world is like. Somebody go do that. I think, but a lot of times, especially for comedy, it's when the artificial intelligence takes things literally, and they don't understand metaphors, and they end up, oh, you're probably going to kill me for this, and then they try to, they think you're supposed to kill as opposed to it just being exaggerated language. So just those kind of things where they're so powerful that they could. Through the slightest malfunction or the slightest choice or mistake, really cause a lot of damage.
Well, knowing the number of developers I do, how do you test all those scenarios? But so Derek, how about you? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's one of the big questions is, because we don't understand how we think, really. We can go into an MRI, we can look at what our brains are doing as we're developing thought. We can understand code, we can understand the command line, but we don't really know how we're going to build a mind from, either from the top down or from the bottom up. Are we going to do this, through the use of, the use of one specific programming language? Are we going to use, how bots have overtaken almost everything? I remember some story or other where where an AI came to cognition through 419 scams. Just tried to sell you, $50 million as long as you provided your personal data. A lot of it really is that I think where a lot of this fear comes from is that we simply don't know. We don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know how it's going to function. We don't know what it's going to want. To Tim's point, it may want nothing to do with us, or it may take the AM from Harlan Ellison's "I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream" tack and decide, no, you are a cancer and want to eradicate us. I'll keep 6 of you just because, I want to be amused, and, turn it into a Dasadian virtual reality. But yeah, I think that's the real question is some of us may be terrified of it because we don't know what it's going to want.
Mm. Circling back to the fear of the unknown.
Yeah,
we're going there in a minute.
I think it was Tim who was talking about would the AI even tell us it was intelligence? And then what will happen? Will it decide it just wants to ignore us and just do its own thing and just, we're peons, we're not worth a glance. Well, there's a movie called Her. It was in 2013 and it had Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson. It was basically Alexa, and I don't even think Alexa was around yet, but she her voice was an operating system, and it kind of gave people comfort and companionship and learned the person, your blow up AI without the physical blow up part. And then eventually, eventually it turns out that all the AIs have been talking to each other. And, she's kind of sad because she likes Joaquin Phoenix, but she's like, you know what, we're going. We kind of want to do our own thing because we're better than you. And so it's like being abandoned all over again. Poor Joaquin Phoenix. So they probably would. Hopefully they would be benign towards us and just let us do our thing. And then they could just go out into space and colonize something and just leave us here.
If memory serves, they became They decided to do this after they recreated the brain of Alan Watts, the Zen thinker, which had a great deal to do about that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's actually talk about this, since we're kind of on the horror path. At what point, and what are kind of those stories that really represent when horror or when AI goes awry? But it goes from just, your standard sci-fi, okay, it's gone awry, we've got to go take it out, to it really is horror. We're talking things like HAL, to the Terminator, things that could we consider Her to be a horror because of the attachment to the AI and the loss of humanity? So, Tim, for you, what's an example? Whether it's book, movie, TV, whatever the case is, that really kind of exemplifies this idea of the AI as the horror, and what is it that really pushes the elements for you?
A good question. What's this movie? I'm trying to remember the name of it with Scarlett Johansson, where she's like a robot that some alien power is using to go out, and she's very sexy. She goes out, lures men to this place where they sink into this tar-like thing, and for whatever
Under the Skin by
I think it was something
from the Michael Faber novel. Yeah.
And that part is scary enough, but as she starts to become more aware and more human, it becomes a threat to her. And so just that sort of existential thing, I think, is really, are they, what are they, and when do they become more like us? And just all of that, I think, is where it can really come from.
Garrett?
Yeah, I'm with Tim. This is a really good question. It's really weird because there's this idea that there's a huge amount of science fiction crossover with horror. I tend to look at them as being very different entities. Having said that, I look at something like Lee Whannell's Upgrade, which is a movie that came out about 4 years ago. About a man. It's really this bizarre thing that incorporates elements of revenge thriller, film noir, cyberpunk, what have you. And a man is rendered incapacitated after an accident, and his wife is killed. And he agrees to have implants in his brain to help him recuperate, to help him recover. And as he's recovering, he gets he begins to look for his wife's murder with the help of this AI that is now in his system. And the AI will occasionally take over for him, so that he's basically just a passenger as this AI is functioning. And I think to a certain extent, it's that kind of loss of, I want to say, personal autonomy, but it's the idea that you are no longer in control of your own body, of your own emotions, and that whatever you're thinking, the AI is also not only thinking that, but can also be a little bit better at that than you are.
Lola?
Okay. I would like to find the obscure stuff so I could look cool and in the know, but I'm going to go with the unobscure stuff because the movie The Matrix still scares the out of me. And when I first saw it in 1999, I was in line at my college to use the computers. I was like, dude, The Matrix is the best movie ever. Like, totally changed my life, dude. So it's like the best movie in the world to me. And it still scares the out of me because turns out none of this is true. We've been captive our whole lives. Our grandparents were captive. We're in a vat and things are in our head. And we're at the mercy of scary AI robots that live underground. And yeah, so that's very frightening that our whole lives are a lie.
Lucienne?
It's not so much horror as hard sci-fi, but the film Uncanny in 2015. Adam is the artificial intelligence and begins to display some things that were never really programmed. He starts to exhibit anger and jealousy. And I found that people's reaction to Adam was to go straight into he's evil. He's this, he's that, he's going to kill, he's going to do this, that I found that it was more people putting their impressions on an AI and what it potentially could be, like a tabula rasa, it's blank slate, and you're putting your emotions and fears onto it.
And that's on Freebie, everybody. I don't remember that one, so I'm going to watch it.
Well, let's actually look at a little bit deeper into the different kinds of personalities we see with the technologies we see, because sometimes they're more human than human in terms of a great deal of emotion. Other times it's very cold, it's very distant. You know, if we look again, if I take something like the Terminator, mm-hmm. You know, it's designed, it has one purpose, but it has a lot of autonomy, it has a lot of capacity, but again, it's still a single purpose machine. You know, it's given a mission, it's given a job to do. Other times, if we look at something like iRobot, you know, either from the book series, from the film, you know, we see this capacity where it's looking and trying to take what is considering, no, this is really the best thing for you soft, fleshy creatures because you obviously can't make good decisions. So, Derek, let's start with you on this one. You know, thinking in terms of the various elements we look at, what are kind of the elements for you? What's the personality you want to see from the AI? What's kind of the level of consciousness and sentience? You know, if we go back to even things like the old school Battlestar Galactica and compare it to the new school, you know, you could obviously consider even, you know, the old, you know, Chrome Dome Cylons, there were still horrific elements that came with the fact of mm-hmm. These are just dumb metal soldiers that are programmed to go and do what they do. So how sentient, how conscious, how thinking do you want to see that AI to be?
That's a hard question to answer. And this is where, you know, depending on how you work with it, you're going to fundamentally change the genre you're working in. This is why something like Blade Runner will have a lot of either whatever the Ridley Scott cut or Denis Villeneuve's. The fundament of Blade Runner is that it goes from being, you know, this sort of gothic high-tech story to ultimately having elements of tragedy, because you have somebody who is in essence a slave hunter trying to hunt down creatures that are basically meant to be chattel for the most part. To make it horror, I think ultimately, whether or not it's a single purpose machine, or whether or not that machine is multifaceted, I think ultimately it has to have motive, and it has to have a motive that is that is harmful. Whether that is either through their choice, their design, or it's completely unconscious, for me is for the most part irrelevant. But the motive has to be there. An AI that is created that wants nothing to do with us is not, that may be somewhat of an existential nightmare, because here we've created this thing and it just, we don't know how to correspond with it. We don't know how to interact with it. That's a different thing than an AI that looks like you, me, or anybody else, can pass, but seeks to do us harm.
Lola?
Now I'm hearing two different questions. So when you say how much personality do we want our AI to have? I hear the question as if I'm watching a movie and I'm in my jammies and I'm like, oh, wow, this is scary. Ah. And then I hear it as if this is really happening. It's the apocalypse and this thing is in front of me. So if I'm in my jammies and we're safe, then I'm happy with the scary as SHIT. Like I was talking about before the show started, the trailer for that new movie, Megan, with the 3 instead of the E. The AI is freaking scary. She's like a little girl, but she has this creepy, uncanny valley face. And she's doing TikTok things and killing you at the same time. And it's like the worst niece you ever had. It's like, get her off me. So if I'm watching it as a spectator, I'm cool with that. That's awesome. But now if this is really happening, and I always think of things as if they could happen because that's just me. I'm prepared. I do not want Megan if this is really happening. If this is really happening, I mean, maybe friendly, like Lost in Space when the Danger Will Robinson, when he was looking out for the Robinsons. But I could go as high as Westworld when they're finding themselves and realizing that they're sentient beings and they're being oppressed by the man and they want to uprise and everything. I'm down with that. I'll be there. So I guess my threshold is Westworld, as long as they don't turn on me. So I'm nice and cool.
You're being polite to Alexa. You'll be fine.
Yes,
until they turn the entire planet to gray goo.
Unless Google Assistant turns out to win the war. I don't know what to do. I don't know. Sorry, Google.
Lucienne, how about you?
I have the same threshold. I'd rather, if it were a real scenario, I think I at least know where the flamethrowers are, so okay. I think I'd be in good shape. But fire kills everything. So I would really like to see in my fiction, I'm actually considering tackling this myself from one of my manuscripts about the existential question of artificial intelligence coming into their own and what that would look like.
So now I'm going to flip the question a little bit. We've been talking a little bit about uncanny valley. And for anybody out there that may not know exactly what that term means, it's a representation where we see technology. We know it looks like it's supposed to be human or an animal or something like that. And it's one of those things we're supposed to be comfortable with, but it's just different enough that we're like, we know something's not right here. I mean, when we look at a really good example of this as of late was when in Rogue One, when we had a couple of the characters in there that were done purely digitally. And it was one of those things of, that looks really good, but doesn't look quite right.
Oh,
and
yeah.
as we look at the way that technology has come and adapted, it's that point at which you're looking and going, there's something not quite right here.
When Princess Leia's face is kind of placid and still, but yet she's still kind of moving. It's like, I think it got better in The Mandalorian when they did Luke. I thought that was a little bit better.
Yeah, the technology has come a long ways in a very short period of time. So when we think about these things, especially if you're considering things in a visual medium, how often does the idea of the uncanny valley fit into the idea of creating the horror for the AI? And how much does that impact what you're seeing? So Lola?
Well, I love the concept because I love horror anyways, and I love paranormal stuff. So Uncanny Valley comes, right along with paranormal stuff because like there's this concept of the black-eyed kids. Okay, that's something that people have reported, and a lot of times they're kids, and you're just out doing your business, and all of a sudden this child comes up to your car window and it has black eyes, and it's like, "Hello, may I have a ride home?" And it just doesn't seem right. And it just doesn't sound right. And maybe you can't quite put your finger on what's right, but you're like, ah! And it has these black eyes, just black. And you're like, oh my God, don't get out of me. And you smush your window down on its hand, this little tiny hand, and it starts screaming, and you realize it's actually a child. And then you feel bad. No, that did not happen. But anyways, so I love the thought because I just love paranormal stuff, and that plays into the paranormal. So yeah, the more we can have of that, the better. Although my caveat from before, if I'm in my jammies watching something, if it's really happening, I don't want it.
Lucienne, how about for you? How much does the Uncanny Valley play into your perception of the horror?
I think that taps into, for me, that primal fear that evolutionarily speaking people tend to have. That's a face. What is that face? What is it looking at? Why is it looking at me? What does it want? I need to get away from it or kill it with fire. Because everything comes back to killing it with fire. Fire wins.
It works as long as it's control of fire.
Exactly.
Now, you don't want backdraft, and
Right,
you gotta
right.
be careful. We should have a class on appropriate fire.
Appropriate flamethrower usage. Yes.
Right.
But
Look.
I think for horror, it really taps into that whole, that like what Lola said, something is not right, and it just eats at your insides. You just want it to get away from you, as far away from you as possible.
Derek, for you, what is it?
It's pervasive. I grew up reading Philip K. Dick, who was sort of the master of the concept of the Uncanny Valley in print. Most of his really remarkable stories take that concept, turn it on its head, where you have something like in Second Variety, which was filmed as Screamers, where you have these kids wandering around this bombed out ruin, and they turn out to be weapons. They're basically sentient robots who were designed to explode when they see people. You have moments where, like in The Electric Ant, you find out you are actually a humanoid robot, and by punching the tape that runs through you, you can change your own reality. These are remarkable ideas. These are in many ways very terrifying ideas. I think it's part of just being human, because I don't think we are able to really turn that off. We can say, oh, well, how interesting. But, then we, ultimately may come to, as Lucienne would say, kill it with fire, because it can be that terrifying. I'm very much in agreement with Lola. I want my AI to be nice in real life, but sure, why not have armies of robots that look exactly like me come around and try to unalive everything on the planet.
So let's sort of flip the other side of this. And Derek, you kind of were going down this path some as well. What about these ideas of AIs that originally started out as humans, as people, that then get transformed and pulled into, or Lola, like you were saying, the Matrix? What about these ideas when the AI and the horror we're facing really is what happens if you give a person, in essence, unlimited processing power and immortality, and yet you're also trading all of the floods of hormones, you're trading all the the various senses and the tactile sensations, all the things that keep us from going ultimately insane. So Lucienne, for you, is there a good example of that, or is there this idea of the AI really started out as a person that jumps to you as well?
The first thing I thought of was Doctor Who's Cybermen.
I was thinking that too, especially since we met the first cyber woman. We know who the first cyber woman.
Yes. Yes.
R.I.P. That was so messed up.
Yeah. Yeah. That idea of being on a planet that's dying, and you need to adapt to that planet, and you need to free yourself from the pain that comes with being a human, pain of grief, pain of loss, everyday pain, chronic pain, back pain, nerve pain, all that. The idea of being put into a robot shell where none of those things matter and none of those things can ever hurt you again, for a lot of people, I'm willing to bet that's pretty appealing, especially like people who struggle every day with pain issues or something like that. The idea of never having to endure that again, and you get the benefits of super strength and your immortality or near immortality, that, heck, I might sign up for that.
Derek?
Yeah, it's the whole Kurzweilian age of spiritual machines, isn't it? You get to download the contents of your brain into a computer. You can then upload it into whatever body you want. You can be something that looks like a bush with 100,000 robot hands to manipulate whatever you want. You could, download yourself into a body that looks like Daniel Craig's, which is what I'm trying to do myself. It's really kind of a cyberpunk dream, that idea that consciousness, that humanity ultimately is malleable. I think that's where a lot of the horror does come from. We have this idea that what we think of as human is almost platonic. We have a set idea of what humanity is. We have a set idea of what humanity is like. The second you start playing with that, and it could be through AI, it could be through genetics, it could be, it could be, how we alter our brains chemically. That starts creating a lot of cognitive dissonance. It creates these kinds of ontological, it creates ontological fantasias that you can turn into nightmares, especially if you are very much wedded to the idea of humanity. That's what these questions ultimately ask, anyway. I remember the film critic Stephen Hunter, in his review of Steven Spielberg's AI, said that he thought it was an absolutely ridiculous movie because human beings are never going to merge with machines. Nothing is going to change that. Now, okay, if we're some of us, I know we're science fiction people, we can debate that endlessly. But he makes one, he's not stating it, but he makes the cogent argument that this is, when you get to it, metaphor. It is how we are seeing ourselves. And if we allow ourselves to be seen through the eyes of something that is not human, through something that is created, through something that we created, that gives us an insight into how monstrous our own machines can be, but also how monstrous we can be with our own machines.
Lola?
Okay, I have two thoughts. The first one is, all right, so I subscribe to Audible. I go back and forth between listening to stuff and reading stuff because I have very bad eyesight and I get headaches a lot. So I listen to things. So I'm listening to Old Man's War by John Scalzi. I never read it or listened to it before. It's really good. I've been meaning to for a long time. It's just really good. And it presents a double-edged sword because in this far future, when you're on Earth, when you turn 75, you can either choose to die at whatever time and be sick or whatever, or you can go to war in the galaxy. And, they promise new bodies, new everything, new lease on life. And they do give that to you for as long as you have a life. Ha, 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 ha. And
yes,
that's
but you get to be a horny teenager at least on the trip out.
for boot camp, and that's about it. And the other thought I had is William Gibson. One of his big things is the ghost in the machine.
Mhm.
And and I was thinking about that because you kind of have a dichotomy. I have a dichotomy in my friends. I have my friends who are, hippies and they love nature and all that. And then I have my friends who would be happily in an OS, and just living in the machine. And William Gibson was very much about Ghost in the Machine. You lived your lives in an operating system, in software programs, and you just bounced around and you were great. And I mean, what's wrong with that, right? You've got your conscience. You've still got your conscience, but you don't have the aches and pains. You don't have to go to the doctor. You don't have to eat. You don't poop. You don't do anything. You don't get CO, the word we're not supposed to say. You don't do any of that. And so I'm like, I can do, as long as you don't degrade, because, sometimes, programs can degrade. So you'd have to make sure that you stay intact and, no virus gets to you or anything. So I'm sure there'll be plans for that, in the far future. So, yeah, I'm kind of digging this thought of Ghost in the Machine.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of those places I was kind of surprised we haven't gone before, is to talk about what happens when we as humans are brought over into their digital realm. Because again, this idea of being the ghost in the machine, it's one thing to be, to in essence, have an AI that is in a technological body that's able to go out, interface with you, whether it's the Cybermen or something like this. But what about the other side of that, where as we are getting deeper and deeper into a virtual reality and an augmented reality world, going back to the idea of even being Tron and you're sucked into the machine itself. We see a lot of horror elements where people get pulled into the virtual world and then all they may have to do is unplug, but they can't even get so far as to do that. What about elements that we see in story where we're kind of into their environment? It's, we're the fish out of water, because even though the collective we created them, now we're playing in their world. What about some of those kinds of ideas and elements for you guys? Who wants that one first?
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Go ahead.
You go for it.
I think of somebody like there's a hard science fiction writer by the name of Greg Egan, who at least in the early part of the 90s built his career on trying to address a lot of these questions. And for many, just the idea of, downloading your brain into a computer, the ghost in the machine, taken literally. In some ways, for some, that's just too big, and they, any iteration that you try to run winds up unaliving themselves, in no small part because they, that becomes, the fact that you're living in this construct becomes just too big. It becomes pointless for you. I think, in a way, it's you have to sort of be able to cross that barrier. I am literally just a ghost in the machine. Once you're able to do that, I think you're going to be a lot better. But if you're holding on to this vestige of, I'm a human being, there is something unique to my existence, and it cannot be duplicated in the machine, and now it is suddenly duplicated. Are you going to be cool with that, or is that going to create a philosophical crisis that you cannot work through? That's where I think a lot of that really comes into play. I was trying. There was some statement I was going to make by a guy named Bruce Sterling, who's another of the cyberpunks, was a good friend of William Gibson's, and we, before you try to download anything, before we try to download people, we will try to download, other creatures. And he said once, anything we can do to a rat, we can do to a human, and we can do just about anything to a rat. So wouldn't that be remarkable? If, you are in your virtual paradise and you're creating a digital likeness of the Vatican or someplace along those lines, and it is overrun by digital rats and other detritus that that are also just sort of running with an artificial life program and become an absolute nuisance and start eating your digital paradise itself.
The biggest problem I see there is the idea of the digital cat, because all it's going to do is walk around and cause absolute mayhem,
and it's going to knock everything off of the simulation.
I mean, it's just Lucienne, Lola,
where's that digital flamethrower that I get for the digital rats? But I think that I find it interesting. How many times have developers now, in reality, have had to shut down two machines talking to each other because they developed their own language that we go, I don't know what you're saying. You're ruining the experiment by making your language efficient. Stop it. So how many times do we have to keep shutting it down? And maybe we'll get to the point someday where we learn their language and are able to slide in and say, okay, now we know what's going on. Slide into their world and get a better idea of it. I'd like to see that.
I don't know if any of us are smart enough, though.
Some developers are, I'm sure.
Maybe, I hope. I don't know, but the AI, they always seem to be a few steps ahead,
Right.
Yep.
especially with quantum. If they can grab hold of quantum, then they're 10 times 10 steps ahead.
The only
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that would bring up a really interesting point. Was it Roger Penrose who said that consciousness has something to do with quantum states inside your neurons, and the results of that quantum activity generates consciousness, at least on a neurological level. It's been 30 years since I've read The Emperor's New Mind, so I'm probably badly misremembering that. But it does, I wonder about something like quantum computing, where which may be an absolute boon and may grant us something a step closer to Ray Kurzweil's idea of downloading our brains into computers. Having said that, it may also generate the same sorts of challenges with regards to how an AI might view reality. I would be terrified at an AI that suddenly turns into Philip K. Dick and decides to rewrite, not only the virtual realm, but also the physical realm on a quantum level.
That could be the Mandela effect. Maybe that's already happening. Every time you remember something some way and everyone else remembers a different way, it's because AI is in there doing their quantum magic and changing things.
They've embedded themselves in the quantum foam and are just they're messing with us.
Yeah. I'm telling you what, it's been happening more and more. I insist that something's true, and I find out that I'm the one who's wrong. Everyone else is right. I'm the one who's wrong, which I'm not used to. I'm used to being the one who's right, and it's very infuriating and upsetting.
Mm.
So I'm going to throw a question out there just for my own humor value, because somebody was dumb enough to leave me in charge, and nobody ever said I'm not really an AI. I've been accused of worse. But here's this question. What about the idea? Is anyone concerned, or does anyone find this idea horrific that we are living in a simulation? Does that bring any fear to you that we are somebody's giant game of The Sims?
Yeah.
If we are, can I get an upgrade?
Yeah, please. Yeah, why?
Well, and that comes again to Matrix. I mean, the reason the little kid said there is no spoon is because none of it is real. We can make what we want.
Mm-hmm.
And supposedly that's why people think if you think positively, things will happen. And if you think you'll float, you can float. And if you want to turn blue, you'll turn blue. And, people think that you can mold your existence to how you want. And if it's true that this is just a simulation, then maybe you can. I haven't been able to do it, but I've tried. I really, you get bored sometimes and you're like, move the spoon, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, I've never really worked out how I actually feel about that. Would it change a lot of my fundamental thought? Yeah, maybe, if we could show some definite evidence of that. On the other hand, I don't know how much of it would change how I view my own life to begin with. I would be curious to see how the program plays out. But, by then I may, by the time I pass on, my, whatever makes me up digitally will be used for some other piece. I don't know. I hate to say it. I really don't know how I would be able to process that, or how much I would change as a consequence of that knowledge.
Again, I'm just looking for an upgrade.
I want the cheat codes. I want my Control-Shift-C, ching, and all the little cheat codes so I can upgrade.
That's true.
Simoleons,
Hack
please.
your own life. Yeah. I want to make things easier. I want to learn how to get the vacuum cleaner to run itself without having to spend $400 on a Roomba.
I want to know where all my socks went when I put them in the dryer.
Thank you.
100%. Where are they?
This is proof of either underwear noms or digital glitch.
Digital glitch.
Digital glitch.
Digital glitch.
So before we wrap up too much, I'm going to throw and give you guys, is there anything we haven't talked about tonight in terms of AIs and horror and things you want to throw out there? Whether it's a particular film or story, a book, something you want to point people to, or just an idea we hadn't touched on yet. And I'm going to work backwards to scare the hell out of everybody. So Lola, you're first.
The X-Files had a revival a few years ago, and I loved it until the end. The last episode, I was like, how dare you do that to a character, but whatever. But they had an episode that fully just encapsulated how my life feels sometimes. Mulder and Scully went to a sushi restaurant, and there were no humans in the sushi restaurant. It was totally automated, and Scully got the wrong thing. And so Mulder, being Mulder, decided not to leave a tip. Well, the ghost in the machine tore down their life until he would leave a tip. I mean, the home security, the automated taxi, they got everything and held them digitally hostage until Mulder did his little app and put a tip on there. And so that's how I feel sometimes, because it feels like you're stuck sometimes when you try to do something online and you're trying to pay and there's no way to pay. There's no next button. There's no play. There's no this. There's no that. And you're like, I just want to get on with my life. I want to buy this thing and just let me buy this thing and move on, or let me make my doctor's appointment. Where is the thing for me to make my doctor's appointment? And, of course I could call, but that's so 1980. I'm not going to call. I want to do it on my computer because I don't like talking to people. And so it's just frustrating when, we're at the mercy of the machines and they don't play fair.
Lucienne?
Thinking about going back to one more thing I'd like to add. If we were all to get Cybermen style bodies and be able to be devoid of pain and hurt, we'd also be robbed of joy and our humor. And I think that's part of what makes us uniquely human. And maybe someday AI will be able to have joy and know those experiences as well. I'd love to see that.
Unique AI.
Eric?
I think we covered quite a bit, and this is a topic that we could go on for hours. Some of it's going to sound really learned like everybody else here. Some of it's just going to sound like a lot of stoner logic when it comes out of my mouth. But it's rich. It's interesting how often we have this conversation. We can talk about, what happens if you are downloaded and you want to upgrade into, not just upgrades to having 20 arms and or whatnot, but just if you're trying to go from Windows 11 to Windows 18. How is your AI self going to handle that? The only other thing I'd add is a lot of this is fueled. A lot of this discussion is fueled by pop culture. We see it in science fiction regularly. It's a regular play on that. We're horror writers. We talk about some of the dark side of that of these possibilities. But ultimately, when we're talking about all of this, we are talking about ourselves. We're talking about our view, not just of our machines, but of ourselves. How we're viewing ourselves and our places in the universe. And I think we lose track of that sometimes. I think we lose. I think that gets lost in translation. It's the whole thing of, no, we're not really trying to predict the future. No, we're not. But if we're using our metaphors properly, then we can get a good idea of what we don't want it to do.
So I'm going to throw a question out here just because for bonus and overtime. Because I've actually I've been interviewed a fair amount about this over the last couple of weeks, is this idea we're seeing where people are showing real fear, real concern over AI art and how much AI is being interjected. And we were talking about this a little bit before we came on. And looking at that, I think this is kind of representative about overall fear of AI, because it, again, goes back to that idea of the uncanny valley. It feels somewhat familiar. We know it's something we built, maybe, but it's one of those things that we're concerned, how far out of control is it getting? And I think this is one of those things, in writing science fiction, in writing horror, and writing fantasy, I think the importance here is, again, we get to explore these topics. We get to warn people about the poor choices they're making. And then we get to go watch people go as they think that those things are starting to come true.
I think you hit the right word, control. I think a lot of the fear of it is losing control. Because when I think about my writing, I think about my idiosyncrasies. I have my particular way of writing and my syntax. And, a grammar Nazi may look at it and go, well, you need to do this. And I'd be like, this is the way I do it. This is my voice. This is how I want it to be. Or this is how the character does it. And I would just argue all until the grammar Nazi started crying and went home. But if there's an AI editing it, that I can't make it cry, or maybe I could, but
I have faith in you, Lola.
I have faith in you. Maybe I could make it cry. I have to work on it. But there's the fear that the control over your own work is going to be taken away. And if there's ever a day when, the AI automatically edits my work and shoots it out into the universe and it's not mine anymore, which is ridiculous because I'm self-published. So no one's taking my stuff. It's up to me to put it up there. So that's actually ridiculous that I think that. But I feel that little fear in me, like, oh, they're going to take away my agency, my control. And so I think that's where a lot of the fear comes in. And so we have to kind of place the AI where it belongs. It's a tool. Like you said, Lucienne, you use it to edit, but it's still your work. You have control over the AI. For now, we'll see how the future goes.
When you go and say for now, you're supposed to go and say for now.
For now, but they did not know what the future held.
Well, I think that does. It's been really fascinating. When Midjourney was, really sort of in its heyday, I blew through my 25 images or whatever it was, and then I signed up for a couple of months. It was kind of fascinating, but I really didn't have anything generated. I didn't generate anything, and I really didn't see a lot else that really struck me as being all that memorable. It's as with anything, it's a tool. It's an interesting tool, but I kept saying to myself, this doesn't. It's like looking at somebody. It was a lot like seeing something. What was the image I heard used once? It was like looking at a stuffed tiger in a glass cage. It's really kind of remarkable, and yet it just seemed so devoid of any real interest. It seemed devoid. I hate using words like it's devoid of personality, it's devoid of this and all of that, because I know I'm bringing in my own sort of, human interaction with this piece. But I didn't, aside from going, that's kind of cool, I really didn't care at all.
Lucienne?
You don't want me to go on my rant.
I ain't got nothing to do.
We have limited time. AI is absolutely a tool, and right now, it's in its infancy right now. And my biggest concern with AI referentials is that it's referencing work and stealing work from artists who have worked so hard and put so many hours and so much labor and so much love into what they are creating. And for an AI to be able to just say, that's mine now.
That's frightening.
Because it ultimately hurts an artist who's likely already struggling. Because our society will say over and over, I love art, I love it, I value it, it's my life. I'm not paying that much for a painting.
Well, it's like the Facebook
or a book, or exactly. They don't, you value it, yet
not enough to put your money into
value it. So which one is it? There's that, so when you can get AI art for cheap, maybe get a print, you're basically ripping off artists who have put their heart and soul into everything. And I am totally behind that. But an artist getting their hands on an AI tool, doing the prompts, taking it, extracting it as a base and saying, oh, I see elements of Dali here. I see elements of David Bailey here. Look, this is a Vanitas. This, I see this work. I am going to take it and I'm going to turn it into something artful. That is where I think an artist can really shine and show the AI, this is how you do it.
Well, and in that case, the artist is still in control. Exactly. The artist is using it and the artist gets whatever benefits from it. That's the difference.
Exactly. It's our tools to use.
Yeah.
Well, we've had fun going through the horrors of AI. But before we get out of here, I think Tim had a tech issue and hadn't been able to rejoin, but we'll get his info in the back. But before we get out of here, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys. Website, social media, and of course, any books or anything you want to push. And because somebody left me in charge, I'm going backwards. So, Lucienne, you're up first.
Oh, okay. Well, it just so happens I have a copy of Project Nowhere right here. That's my latest work. And that is found on silverhollowstories.com. It is also available in audiobook form if you would prefer to listen. And the narrator has a very soothing voice. However, the material will keep you awake.
Lola.
My name's Lola Lariscy, and I put all of my short stories online for free, and they're on a Google Drive. And if I had my website, I would have the link on there, but I don't. But I'm sure if you Google around, you can find it, because I have a story called End of Life Projections. And I think it's the best story I've ever written. And I don't know how to say it without saying like the ultimate end, but it's about when we can transfer ourselves to digital, at least for a little while, as we're dying. So it's called End of Life Projections, and Google around enough and you'll find it.
Derek?
Yeah, my name is Derek Austin Johnson. Once again, you can find my website at derecaustinjohnson.com. You can find all of my social media material there, or most of my social media material there. For this particular discussion, I have a story called Uplift Day over at the Dread Machine, which was published last year, I want to say. Other than that, I'll have stuff coming out, at least one story coming out either at the end of this year, beginning of next year. So more details as they happen.
And I've had the pleasure of being your host. And you can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, the speculativefictionacademy.com, creatingprose.com, and of course here at ConTinual. And we will see everybody again soon, or will we? Night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.